So welcome back to the Curious Cult Show. This is the last episode of season 2, and I'm very excited to give that honor to my very good friend Sam Beckbessinger.
Hey!
Sam, welcome to the show. And no jokes, I'm really excited that you're the last guest. It's very rare that you get to ask good friends questions like these in a platform like this.
I'm excited.
So I'm very excited.
Yeah, me too. And I think you can ask me the all the difficult ones.
Well, then I'll not be shy, and I'll ask them when they come up. But for the time being, as my listeners and viewers know, I don't introduce my guests. I let them introduce themselves. So tell us who you are and why we should be listening to you.
So I'm Sam Beckbessinger. I am on a quest to figure out how to adult, and I am trying to share what I learn in my how the heck do you adult journey with other people. I'm a writer primarily. I wrote one best-selling book called Manage Your Money Like a Fucking Grown-Up. It has a younger sibling called Manage Your Money Like a Grown-Up, the mouth washed out with soap version. It's just what I call it, which is for teenagers.
That's for teenagers, right?
Yeah, okay. I write for TV. I'm working on a novel. I write on the internet. I'm a writer. I write things. Yeah.
Awesome.
It's me.
It's what I want to do when I grow up, is be a writer.
Me too.
I know, right? Jesus.
I think writing and being a writer are very different things. Like, I remember I once had this long conversation with my therapist and this was after I had literally a best-selling book that had been a bestseller for a while. And I said to her, like, I'm waiting for the day that I'll feel like I'm a writer, like I can introduce myself as a writer. And she really challenged me on that. And she was like, why do you have this idea that, like, what does that mean? Who gets to call themselves a writer? And why does that mean so much to you? Which is still something that I'm working on.
I just want to say out loud, fuck her, because that is some bullshit deep therapy.
Oh no, it's like I wasn't ready.
I know. I mean, I'm still not. And I mean, off air, you and I were just briefly talking about a rough day that I was having, and like that kind of sums it up, right? Is when do you get to call yourself an adult or a writer, or in my case, an entrepreneur, or whatever the fuck I am? Because I also consider myself a bit of a writer. And like my partner said to me, "So is it?" And you said it to me too. Is it other people? Like, are you comparing yourself? And I was like, no. I just feel disappointed in my own abilities and achievements. And I think that's worse, right?
It is, definitely. And no one can talk you out of it, right? There's no point in trying. Yeah. It's just your own brain being an asshole.
Yeah. So I mean, this is not pre-recorded questions, but like, how do you overcome that, Sam, as Sam? Because you're leveled up, right? You started off with your first book, and well, I mean, in terms of what you're writing, you started writing your own stuff. Now you're writing movies and TV, and like, how do you go to work every day?
I don't know. I mean, I think, I still definitely, I think I have terrible imposter syndrome. What has helped is one of the really amazing things that has happened in my life is that I've gotten to meet more of my heroes in the writing space. And what has been both really reassuring and exceptionally demoralizing is that even having met people who I regard as like the best writers in the world, turns out they are still scared of calling themselves writers too, and are still waiting for the day that they feel like it's okay and they're not going to be found out as a fraud. Turns out
so what do you take from that, Sam?
There's the external validation is nowhere. It will never come. There is no amount of success that will ever give you the external validation.
So then is the converse solution to just go, I'm a writer?
Maybe it's to weaponize your insecurities and self-doubt.
Okay.
And use them to motivate yourself.
Yeah, I want you to explain that. But before you do, I'm going to admit this in public out loud and record it. But I'm watching the Shawn Mendes documentary on Netflix. I think he's brilliant. And he said something that someone told him when he was 11 or 12. He was like, I want to be a songwriter. And the person he was talking to said to him, so have you written a song? And he said, no. He said, well, just be a songwriter then. Just go write a song. And maybe being a writer or being whatever you want to be is as simple as being that thing.
So there's something really interesting that you're saying, which is something that I think about a lot, which is the difference between verbing and nouning. I don't think I will ever be comfortable with figuring out what the noun is for me, for myself. You are a writer, you are, because I've also been a lot of things. Like I've also been an entrepreneur, I've been a developer, I've been a UX designer, I've been a lot of things, but what I feel much more comfortable with is the verb. Like I love writing. It's my greatest passion and my greatest love. I love making things. I love starting businesses. I love talking to people. I love listening to people. I love doing all of those things. And what's cool about the verb states is that they're not definitional. They don't have like a, you are that you meet that standard or you don't. They're they're in action. You're in progress. You're doing that thing. And I like, that's what I keep returning to is writing is my great passion and my great love. It's the romance of my life is that time that I spend with myself, having conversations with my imaginary friends. And regardless of like what that makes me or what noun I've achieved or not achieved, the verb is great.
Sam, that was beautiful.
Thanks.
It was like you're a writer or something. You're good with words. But I love that. I feel like that's a whole book. You could do a whole book about verbing and nouning and people who verb versus people who noun, because you're right. One is an ownership of the thing that defines you forever, and the other is an action of the thing you're doing right now. And I love it. I'm right now writing and teaching. Doesn't make me a writer or a teacher. It means it's what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
Wow, Sam, that helps. That helps me. I hope it helps everyone else, because it helps me. And on that, okay, let's quickly, before we forget, weaponizing your insecurities. Unpack that for me.
I think like I've spent a lot of time working on self-knowledge as opposed to self-improvement, I think. I think about self-improvement all the time, but I don't think self-improvement is always as helpful as just self-knowledge. And I think that if you understand yourself, including understanding the parts of you that are just crazy, you can sometimes harness your particular flavors of crazy in ways that are helpful for you. And I think that that's probably a more achievable goal for most people than to try to be a different thing, like to try to be different. I long ago learned that one of my biggest ways in which I'm an insane person is that I have no sense of self-esteem that is natural to me. Like I am still a tiny child addicted to getting gold stars from teachers on my homework. Basically, I just never grew out of that. My entire sense of self-worth comes from external validation, which is like
brutal,
terrible thing, a terrible way to live. I really don't recommend it. And it is something that I have worked on, I have tried to overcome. But I also now, maybe the better way to think about it is just to understand that that is true about myself.
Yeah.
Therefore, I need to do something that puts me in direct connection with other people, so that it can fuel that. Try to stuff up the black hole inside of my heart. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I mean, that all jokes aside, that makes so much sense to me. What I've been saying this year, because I get a lot of people say to me, like, how do I get more followers? How do I become this thing? And my answer is always, you're trying to emulate people who are being the most version of themselves. What you have to do is be the most version of yourself.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is also the bad most version of yourself.
Totally.
Not only the good.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's just a total cop-out, though. Like, I should probably just try to find inner peace or something.
I don't know, man. I'm trying to find inner peace and it's fucking hard. So maybe I'm over it. I don't know. Okay, Sam. So tell me about the first difficult thing you ever remember setting your mind to.
So I love this question. So you sent me this question this morning and it got me thinking about something that I have literally not thought about for probably 20 something years. So, which was great. So when I must have been about like 8, I experienced the most intense thing I had experienced in my young life up until that point. And it was the first time that I remember needing to tell everyone about this thing that had happened. So I've always written stories, right? I just never stopped. It's just like, some kids just never stop drawing. I just never stopped writing stories.
Yeah.
But when I was about 8 or 9, I had my first experience with like a newsworthy event, which was that, well, I thought a newsworthy event, which is that our neighbor's house got broken into. But it was actually a very dramatic story and quite intense because the neighbors were away and the alarm system went off and ADT or the security guards arrived. And we heard shouting. And so me and my dad like came out of the house, and there was a man who had been shot in his leg, and he was bleeding and he was screaming and he was lying on the ground. And there were just these men that were standing over him with like big heads. And they were all like super stoked because they'd stopped this criminal. And I was just like,
so the man who was shot was the criminal.
But then I was just like, there's a screaming man who's been shot. How's this okay? And then like I had to have this whole conversation with my dad about like, is it okay that they shot this guy even though he didn't hurt anyone? And it like, but is it like, is this a thing where the good guys won, or is this like a horrific thing that happened?
And how do you feel about this?
I know. And I was just like, little fucking 8-year-old me is just, this must be front page news. Everyone has to know that this thing happened because this is,
I mean, of course, when you're 8.
It's got everything. It's got crime, it's got drama, it's got moral complexity, it's got like deep questions about crime and punishments, retribution, and when the police goes too far. I was like, I have to tell everyone. So I basically decided to go into publishing, and this was probably the first business that I ever tried to start. And I was like, I need to write the story because that's the natural thing for me. So I went and wrote it all up, all the details as I could remember it, like best journalism attempt. And I, on our family's Packard Bell computer, which had like a Microsoft Word equivalent program with a pre-made like newspaper template. And I printed out like 10 copies, like lots of copies. And then I was like, okay, I wrote the newspaper, but now how, like I'd seen the newspaper in shops, and I was like, okay, so how do I now,
what about distribution?
Where's the distribution? How do I get everyone to know about this important event that happened?
Yeah.
And I think in a way that question then did kind of like haunt me for a very long time, is you can write this thing, you can see the world, and that's the first part of this thing that I care about is observation. How do you actually tell people about it?
Wow.
And thank God now the internet exists and all of us can just spew out our every thought.
Jeez, I mean, that is probably the most dramatic answer to that question I've had.
I'd honestly not thought about it until this morning, since I was like 8 years old. But that is the first time that I remember feeling like I had this thing that I needed. I had this desperate desire that I needed to tell people this important thing, and I didn't know how to tell them.
And how did the people in your life react to this? Were your parents like, okay, Sam, let's help you distribute? Or were they like, shut up, little lady, like you need to go and do your schoolwork?
My parents were the most entirely encouraging parents. Always. Wow. They would like bless their freaking socks. They would go with any harebrained scheme that I had. I don't think that they didn't practically help me distribute my ridiculous one-page newspaper, and probably for the best. But I never remember, like I don't remember exactly what happened after that thing, but in all my childhood, I never remember my parents telling me that any of my harebrained schemes were harebrained.
And so I'm very fortunate in this way too, that I have Greek parents, and when my mother believes that when I wake up, the sun shines. so I'm lucky to have that experience. But I'm curious, what do you think that did for you? That you were so supportive?
Absolutely. I that experience of just being absolutely unconditionally loved as a young child, I think it's not something that is replicable in any way. I think that yeah, it's the greatest. It's like, it's the, you know, the idea of like the grace of God, where you get this gift that is unpayable. I think it's just the
Yes.
being loved by your parents is just, it's like it's a thing that's too big for you to ever.
I want to make an interesting observation because I never felt an unconditional love. I felt an unconditional
Mm,
support. Like my parents told me that I could do and be anything I ever wanted to be
yeah.
ever, constantly. And when I did them, they were like, "Oh my God, you're the best at this. How did you get so good?" Even if I was crap. And like I think that sets me up for this life of I want big things, I
Mm.
need big things, I must achieve big things. So yeah, I owe that to my parents, but I think there is for me a fine line between unconditional love and unconditional support.
So, so there's something funny which I think about often when I think about you and when I read the things that you write and the things that you put out there. One of the things I really love that you talk about is failure. Um, so the thing with me as a kid is I was a massive overachiever kid who was terrified of failing in any way. I was like, you know, Miss
Okay.
Straight A's, Miss Gold Stars, right? Very like well behaved,
Of
just
course, external
external
validation.
validation, need all
Yeah.
the gold stars all the time. And
Yeah.
therefore really thrived at school. School was my favorite because school is full of gold stars. And, you know, neither of my parents were very, you know, kind of school type people. You know, my dad kind of, you know, lived on the beach for a year selling pot after high school, you know, and like they were they
Jealous
were
of him.
hippies. They, you know, they, in a way, my kind of compliance with the school system, I think, was kind of mystifying to them. And they were very
Sure.
impressed by it, but also I don't think would have cared very much if I wasn't like that. So it was just this kind of, you are doing your thing. You clearly don't need much help from us in this stuff. Cool, you do your thing.
Yeah.
And it took me until after school, definitely, before I ever really experienced failure. And like all kind of kids who do really well at school, it was a ridiculously devastating experience for me. Like it had made me a very fragile person. There's this idea, which I'm sure you know about, called, I can't remember the psychologist who writes about this, the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. The problem that kids who rely on external validation have is that they end up with this very rigid idea that they either are good enough or they're not. Um, and the
Ah,
first time you
interesting.
fail, if you've never failed before, what you've internalized is, I failed because I suck, not because I didn't try enough, because you've never had to try.
Ah,
And I think that's been one of the
interesting.
healthier journeys of my adult life, is figuring out failure, which is something that I love your
Yeah.
vulnerability about. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And it's such an interesting perspective because I'm trying to help people understand that the way we've been conditioned from school, from younger than school, is that failure is the opposite of success. And that is incorrect. It's fundamentally flawed. For me and for most people, the opposite of success should be not trying. I have not tried, therefore I
Yeah.
have failed. That's cool. That's cool with me. You're a failure if you sit in your ass and you don't contribute. The gifts you're given, you never use. But if you've tried and failed, you've learned. And this is the thing that I've never, and the people that I've interviewed on the show, they very rarely talk about failure. They talk about the lesson from the experience, but they don't talk about the devastation of failure, like you've just mentioned. Because for a lot of these entrepreneurs, the Starbucks founder, they weren't failing, they were just building quickly,
Yeah.
iterating. And you've learned that as a founder and a coder, and you've had to go the hard way. For a lot of these people, it's just intrinsic.
It's amazing. I mean, you know, great. How great for them. They had like an extra decade.
Yeah, fuck them. I mean, I wish I had that, but
People who
whatever.
have like healthy psychologies. Fuck those people.
Those bastards. That is hilarious. Okay, so the next thing I want to ask you, I know the answer to, but I want you to unpack it for me. You obviously are a curious person. To be a writer, you have to be curious. To build worlds in fantasy, you have to be curious. So my question isn't, are you curious? It's how do you feed that curiosity?
Um, So I think that for me, creativity sort of has two distinct phases in a way. And I often am aware of which phase I'm in my brain. I go through phases and times where I feel like what I'm doing is I'm stocking my larder, my vault of ideas and experiences, when those times when what I'm doing is I'm following my curiosity in the world and kind of socking away the things that happen and that are surprising to me. And then there's a different mode, which is like the creativity of making things out of your larder, which comes from making interesting connections between things. So kind of introducing some serendipity to the process of making your recipe, if you follow the metaphor. And I think that you get interesting things from both. You have to do both. You have to have interesting ingredients in your larder, and then you have to combine them in an interesting way. And I think this applies as definitely as much to business as it has in my creative world. I think the best business ideas I ever had were when I came out of UX interviews. Basically, the favorite part of my job that I ever had in that world of like building software was having long conversations with people and observing them. And often you pick up stuff that you don't realize why it's important until much, much later. And then you then find like, wait, I have good things in my larder. And what's important when you're going through your gathering phase, I think, is to take good notes, because I also have no memory at all. So I'm an obsessive note taker and journaler, and I draw as well. I need to make sure that I'm banking the experiences that I have and honoring their value, So after interviewing people about their problems, I make sure that afterwards I sit down and I write down what was insightful. So that's the kind of like magpie behavior, I think. I think it's also important to understand that the richer and more varied the ingredients in your larder, the more interesting the dish will be that you make. Like I'm always skeptical of people, and I love that you are not this type of person, particularly people in the like self-help and business space who seem to only ever talk about other self-help writers or business writers. Like when people ask me honestly, like, what are other books I should read about money, for example, I often say, you know what you should really spend some time reading is like the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. Highly recommended. Like read some philosophy shit, read some everything feeds
sci-fi.
in.
Read something that sparks your brain.
It all feeds in. Don't just stay in this mode of like, okay, this is what I'm trying to achieve, so therefore I need to read as much as I can about that one topic. You'll be amazed what you can learn. Like I think I learned more about money from playing Age of Empires than I learned by reading money books.
I absolutely love that. There's so much to unpack on this. What I've been saying to people, because this comes up so much for me too, people are like, I want to be an entrepreneur. Which should I read? Like, what entrepreneurs? I'm like, no. It's the smashing together of unexpected things that makes your perspective unique. That's what makes you, is how you've gone through the world. Looking at everybody else and going, oh, let me do them. That doesn't work. My favorite quote on advice is asking people for advice is like asking a lottery winner for their numbers.
Totally. Yeah.
That's what works for them. That's how they won the money. It's not going to work for you too, dude. So I did ask you on the gathering of ideas.
No, sorry, but I want to build on something you were saying, which is so good. Like earlier you were saying something about you trying to be the most you. I think that that's also part of it, right? Like you will do your best work when you bring more of yourself to your work, whatever it is. Whether your work is accounting, I don't care. Like you honestly will be a better accountant if you find a way to bring more of your whole self into that job, which
your obsession with pink fluffy slippers,
it all matters.
There's something. There's something there. I completely agree with you. And I think too many people are trying to find the cookie cutter way of being something. There is no instruction manual for being in this place that we call a three-dimensional world. There just isn't. Like we want there to be. And on the book thing, often entrepreneurs say to me, what should I read? And I tell them the book that shaped my worldview is a book called The Three-Body Problem, and it fundamentally shifted how I see the world. And it is a Chinese sci-fi novel about aliens landing on Earth. But it shapes the way I build businesses. It shapes the way I interact with people. It shapes the way I see the future. It was not a book by Tony Robbins, which I read, and it gave me some understanding of money, but it didn't change my world. And that's what you should be looking for in the short 90 years we get, is what is changing your world on a frequent basis.
I mean, it's just incredible that, you know, we're these ridiculous little hairless, mostly hairless primates, some of us more hairless than others, soz. But, you know, that we get to live these multiple lives through language, through stories. And it's just the most exceptional gift of our consciousness. And, you know, that you get to just be in Sishan Liu, what's his name, who wrote The Three-Body Problem? Yeah.
That's
you get to be in his
that's
brain. It's incredible. And you don't only have to be in your own brain. It's like virtual reality.
Yeah. And it is the most, I hate being cliche, but it's the most powerful computer we've got. But the place that my little computer falls flat is what you just said about yours too. And our friend Rich Mulholland introduced me to the idea of idea traps, an idea trap, because I'm really shit at remembering ideas. I literally will think things through while I'm sleeping and wake up and go, oh, I got it. And then go, I'll remember this in the morning. And then I don't. So what are your idea traps, like on a practical level? Okay, so you're a paper person.
I'm such a paper person.
Like that sort of thing.
I've tried over the years. I'm obsessed with productivity systems. It's my favorite way to procrastinate. Is I'm like, cool, let's set up a whole new productivity system. And over the years, I've tried Bear. That's my favorite, like software version of notebooks. I've tried. The thing is, it's not really about the tool. It's about what's far more valuable is the system or the habits that you have around the tool. So I have good habits around my notebooks. I found that.
Lay them out for me.
Sorry.
Lay them out for me. Tell me some of the
I've been essentially following some version of David Allen, I think is his name, is Getting Things Done for the last 15 years. It's the productivity thing that has stuck with me. The most valuable thing that I take from that is that every Friday afternoon I have a 2-hour date with myself where it is the thou shalt not disturb Sam during her weekly review time. It is my absolute, like, do not talk to me during this time. And it is when I process my inputs, because your life is full of inboxes, right? And your notebook is an inbox. It's your email inbox is an inbox. Your WhatsApp is an inbox. You have inboxes all over the place. And it's the one time in the week where you filter, you go through and you figure out what actually matters and you put that somewhere where it can be of use. And if I don't do that, if I go more than like a week, if I skip a weekly review, everything falls apart. So that's kind of the key thing. I start every day with journaling. There's a practice called morning pages, which is fill at least 3 pages of long form writing of just whatever is in your mind. But I'm glued to this thing. It's always on me. I like the slowness of writing. I find that my brain can think, like absorb things better if I'm slowly writing them and there's some physical movement beyond just typing things in. But it doesn't matter. I think what's more important is looking at the things you wrote down.
So much value. I've literally, while you were talking, made a weekly review for myself on a Friday for the next forever, because it's absolutely something I'm struggling with. Is I get through a lot of stuff. I'm good at accomplishing things, but I have no clue what I liked to accomplish, what actually worked, what didn't work. I just don't know. It all just disappears.
It's the thing of, are you accomplishing the right things, which is the essential question for type A's who are addicted to gold stars, Carrie, is there's very easy ways to get gold stars, but are you getting the right stars?
Yeah, and I can't remember the exact quote. I think it's an amalgamation of Jim Carrey saying something to the effect of, you can spend your life working on shit you hate, so you may as well work on things you love. Like, your time is the same. Whether it's something you hate or something you love, you may as well pick the thing you like to do. And I think I do struggle with that. So that was super useful, Sam. Thank you. Well, our conversation sparked another question in me that is unprepared, but I'm sure you have an interesting answer for. I have recently been discovering and playing around with this idea of working professionals work like it's their job. It's people who aren't professional who go, oh, I've got writer's block, or oh, I don't feel creative today. What's your take on this? Like working when you're motivated versus working through it?
I am a big believer. I'm a big believer in treating writing like your job for myself. It's the way that I make it work. Is I treat it very professionally. I set myself very clear goals. I make sure that my butt is at my desk for 8 to 9 hours a day, as I would if I had a job. And I don't, and crucially, just as importantly, I don't work on weekends. Usually. And that is what works for me. I like maintaining steady pace. I hate working under pressure to a deadline at the last second. I like to do things in a very boring, I thrive in boredom. Like I need the most boring framework around my life so that I can do exciting things inside of it. But that said, again, I know many writers, and some of the most astoundingly successful ones I know, you would be amazed how much they are just hot garbage. They are just like, their lives are in shambles. They write entire books 1 month before the deadline, and then that book will be on the New York Times bestseller list. And I've never accomplished that. So you're going to listen to me, or you're going to listen to the hot garbage writers who are nonetheless churning out those books? I don't know. I think the thing is that there is no general rule, and different things work for different people. And those writers, I think, are also weaponizing their bad things, you know, and they've found a way to turn it into fuel in their lives. Some people just need deadlines.
Yeah, that's true. You don't need time, you need a deadline.
I'm not one of those writers, but some 100%.
I am. So I'm an interesting combination. My latest book, I spent 4 months writing, then stopped for 4 months, and then got a deadline for the end of October and wrote the rest of it in 3 weeks. So like I kind of go in the flow. I have to lay it out to begin with, and then have the pressure to finish it and refine it, which is ironic.
I do sometimes love having deadlines. I was thinking that everything that I've ever done in my life that has been on any level successful has started as a very hastily completed version of that thing that was done in like no more than a day to 3 days. And then
can you give me an example? Do you have one off the top of your head?
This is very like lean startup thinking in a lot of ways. So my money book started as 5 blog posts that I wrote over 3 days. I just like really needed to write these blog posts. It was called How to Manage Your Money Like a Fucking Grown Up, which was a hilarious title for a blog post. And I would probably not have picked it for a book. And I just wrote those blog posts because I needed to. And because, you know, I had the story that everyone needed to read, and now Medium exists, so I can put it out there. And then I got a book deal.
Did you know when you were writing them?
No. And I'd written 50 blog posts that year, you know, and these were the ones that stuck. And thank God I'd only invested such a tiny amount of time in all 50 of those things up front, because, you know, if I'd really tried to, I think the blog post I wrote just before that was a comedy blog post imagining what Tinder would look like after a nuclear apocalypse. It was very silly. Imagine I'd worked really hard at trying to turn that into a book. It would have been an absolute waste of time.
Well, or it would have been a freaking huge hit and turned into a shitty TV series.
Who knows? Like Lettuce, the business that I am still kind of a bit involved with some friends, started with one day talking about the product while hiking, and then an afternoon of drawing, you know. Pretty much anything that I've ever invested time in and has been worth investing time in. The project I'm working on at the moment is this ridiculous choose your own adventure game about climate change, which I've somehow managed to secure a bunch of funding to do. But I made a version of that in one day as a joke at a conference, because I just needed a way to communicate what I was learning at the conference. and then people saw the joke version and they were like, can we give you money to make a real version of that thing? And I think in general, the TV show that I'm trying to sell at the moment, to big, important, actual people who make actual TV shows, was a short story that I wrote in 5 days with two of my best friends. And this has been the general thing of my life, is the things that have worked have started as these tiny, tiny versions.
I don't know how to ask you this question. And like, I don't know how to get this out in the right way. So bear with my badly formed question, but what do you think gives you the ability to do this? And let me try and unpack this a little in my head. So there are people that I believe are orders of magnitude more effective than other people because of the way that they've structured their world, because of the inputs, the things they read. They can pull on a lot more resources more instantly than other people. Whereas it takes a lot of other people time to formulate thoughts and think and lay it out. And, they do one thing in their life or one thing in a decade. What do you think gives you the ability to cap onto these good ideas so quickly? Because they're good ideas.
Here's the thing is I think it was just a quantity thing, because I just wrote a lot lot of shitty blog posts, and then eventually one of them was great.
So it's prolific,
and again,
over perfect.
That works for me. And it's not, my way is not better. It's just the way that I have found for myself.
Interesting. So I'm going to agree with you and actually lay that I don't think it's just you. I read a really interesting observation on Neil Gaiman and Ed Sheeran. The combination is fantastic. Neil Gaiman. But both prolific, both exceptionally successful, beyond anyone's guesses. And they both have said that their process is as follows. We have a single ability to get ideas from our brain out of our brain. There's one way out. And that way is clogged up with shitty ideas. So what you have to do is write them out. You have to write out your shitty ideas. And then you get to the good one. That's 17,000 good ideas behind the bad ideas. And I think that there is something to this. There's someone called James Clear. He talks about this too. Yeah. Be prolific, not perfect. The way to be successful is to be prolific. And
it's definitely what works for me. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start writing more, Sam. So tell me what, when you start something, let's say this latest thing, your TV show, whatever, do you think that the big picture is your first view, or the small detail? Where do you start?
Definitely the small detail. I very seldom have like aspirations for projects before when they're starting. I usually just have projects that I start usually come from a small observation that is interesting to me. So whether it's, Letter started with a very small observation, which was that, I was having to log into 5 different platforms to fill out my monthly spreadsheet, and that was irritating. The novel that I'm writing at the moment started with picking up one of my old notebooks from when I was 15, because that is how long I've been obsessively notebooking, and finding this really sweet letter that my best friend had written me, and just thinking that there was something really beautiful about a particular turn of phrase in that letter, and feeling like, and that is now spiraled out into being a whole novel. It's usually just there's a small thing, and I think, and this comes back to this thing about observation and curiosity for me. I struggle to think in big abstract ideas at first. I can get to big abstract thinking if I zoom out, but I have to get there from looking at the real world. And the real world is usually surprising, but it's surprising in its details. And I mean, I find something that's been a good practice for me in doing this kind of thinking is I've been writing a weekly newsletter, which I have found has become a good part of my collect and process the thoughts I have cycle, where once a week I try to sort of just process what I'm thinking a little bit. And I know you do this too. And for me, I found that usually how that writing process goes, just on that little newsletter thing, is I usually start off with here's one very tiny, interesting thing that I've noticed or learned about this week. This week, the thing that is obsessing me is I learned about this painter who worked with one of the first people who went down into a deep sea submarine and was trying to describe these absolutely weird alien fish from the deep ocean. Couldn't really describe them as a scientist. So he brought on this painter who then painted these fish that she'd never actually seen before. But she became so obsessed with painting the deep ocean that she got people to build her, this is like turn of the century, right? One of those copper diving suits. And she took a canvas and oil paints, because oils don't mix with water, down to the bottom of the ocean and has painted paintings at the bottom of the ocean. Incredible.
That's amazing.
This is today's obsession. There'll be a new obsession tomorrow. But I've been thinking so much, like, from this fact that I've learned, and I love to collect facts.
Yeah. See the smashing
now
together.
It's got me thinking things. About how can you see something you've never seen before? And how can you communicate something that no one has seen before? And what does that mean for how we learn and how we experience the world? But it doesn't start with that question. It starts off with this random fact. I
love that. That premise is worth unpacking, mainly because the first time in my life I felt like that. Because I mean, you've met me. I don't shut up. I have words for everything, and I've been this way since I was like 5. Like everybody hates it, but the first thing in my life that I've not been able to understand or explain out loud with words in the most effective way possible is psychedelics. It is impossible to explain with human words what you see out of your brain because they don't exist. And this premise translates quite directly to this idea that you try and explain things to someone who's never been on a psychedelic trip, and you just can't.
Oh, similarly, I've been listening to a lot of Alan Watts lectures recently, king of psychedelics. And he was also a Zen Buddhist, right?
Yeah.
And he does this thing in his lectures sometimes where he starts describing this, like, profound thought about time and consciousness, whatever. And then at some point he'll just stop and just like bang a bell, because he's like, the words I'm saying are not what I actually am trying to communicate to you. The sound of this bell, that's actually a better way of communicating the experience of mindfulness. Wow. So good. Whoa.
Shit. Gee, the second you think you have a good grip on what you're capable of doing, someone like that comes along and says, no, there's more to go. Wow, that's riveting, Sam. Really, really interesting. I don't even know where to go from
your
here.
question was, do I start with the big picture or the little observation? And it's always the little observation.
And I think that the more I ask this question and the more I listen to people's real answers, the more I think anyone who says big picture is likely lying, because there are very few people, and the only example that I can actually think of is Elon Musk, who says, and when he was 18, he said, humanity is screwed. We need to get to Mars. We're all going to die. I'm going to do that. What's the best way to do that? Then you go down to paper. Cool. Like, I think that is a 1 in a trillion person. Most of us go, right now, my problem is X. Holy shit, there's lots of people who have this problem. Cool, this is a deal.
Tim Urban had a great blog post about that. How does Elon Musk think? It's really interesting.
The knobs that he gets to turn. He has this many.
Fascinating.
Tim Urban is my hero. He's my spirit animal. Him and Ricky Gervais are my spirit
animal. I do sometimes wonder that people... My worry about people who have big ideologies is that when you're wrong, you're extremely wrong. You're wrong on a kind of catastrophic scale sometimes, which is
on $1 trillion burn down a shuttle scale. But I mean, I think this is where step shift changes happen in humanity, is when someone takes that leap and is wrong, because then someone else is going to find the right in it. I suppose. I mean, now we're just guessing. Okay, so this one I'm really interested in. From the outside, it always looks easy and quick and simple. You've written a bestseller. It continues to do amazingly. That's always bullshit, and we both know it. So my question is, what challenges have you faced that people
The
wouldn't have
thing,
known about?
this comes, sure, full circle, man, right the way back to the first question. The thing that I did not understand about writing or about making products or about doing anything is that marketing and distributing the thing is honestly half of the thing. Making the thing, at least for me, is usually, that's not the hard thing. The hard thing is getting people to give a shit. Yeah, and that has always been the thing for me. That's been a question in kind of, and the thing that's been just a surprising amount of work that I didn't realize. I think musicians or artists, or writers, we all have this very fanciful idea that if you just create something amazing, people will love it and everyone will see your brilliance. And that's just, it's not. It's work, and people who are successful almost universally, there are some exceptions, some people just get exceptionally lucky, but generally people have worked hard and daily to build communities around what they're doing, to to keep putting things into the world. And that's the thing that has been far more work than I had realized. It might also just be that that's the work that I find harder because I don't like it. I really love sitting down at my desk and coming up with nonsense and having conversations with my imaginary friends. I find it very hard to talk in front of people. So maybe that's the pain that I feel about my work. But I mean, you have to choose some pain, and I'm okay with that. I've made peace with it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's Mark Manson who says that everybody gets to choose a shit sandwich. You just have to pick the shit sandwich you want to eat. Yeah. That is interesting because I do, it's that grass is greener thing to some extent, that what's hard for you is the marketing and promotion. For other people, that's the easy part. They find writing the hard part. So it really is so interesting. I love that question because people take that answer to wherever they want to go. Some people will think like, never mind work in their personal lives, the thing that they've had to overcome to build this thing, because that's their mountain to climb. It's a tough one. I think I'm with you though. I've misunderstood in my younger years that creating is the hard part, and it isn't. Getting into a flow state is actually easier than you might think when you're focused on being a professional about it. Once that's done,
look, I mean, and I say that from the vantage point of someone who is a little bit older, who, I put a lot of time and effort in my 20s, and I know this is also something that you think about and talk about a lot, in building the kind of life that could let me do the work that I am most in love with. That like I scrimped and saved through most of my 20s, and I've made decision after decision to make less money than I could have, because the pain that I am in love with is the pain of writing. And it's pain, but there's been a decade of making decisions around prioritizing the thing that I care about. And I have, and I've been so lucky to have found people along my journey who have helped and supported me doing that. Like I found co-founders for my business that helped me to build the life that I wanted to, and were supportive about it, and that were aligned with me philosophically about what matters and how do you build a business that you can love and you can be proud of. I've been lucky enough to meet collaborators in creative projects. All of that's just luck, but it's also been a lot of decisions, consistent decisions around priorities.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say there's luck, but then there's decisions that lead you to be in the right place to inform that luck, right? And my best friend and someone else who's been on the show, Dave Perrell, he talks about this a lot, that he is not the most talented racing driver in the world. He took his talent and worked harder than everybody else. That's it. He's like, that's the game. That's the game. Because there are talented, I think there's a rapper who sings at the moment, and one of his lines is, the most talented rapper in the world is cleaning toilets somewhere. And that's the game. It is, you get the chance, you get the skill, you have to exploit it. And when you said luck earlier, what popped into my head was Charlize Theron. she got lucky. She got lucky, but she then worked her
Totally.
ass off
Yeah.
to become the best actor she could be.
You need both.
And there is this
Yeah.
balance. It doesn't just come easy.
That one of my writing heroes is I might actually be bungling his name, but Mike Schur, who created like The Office and Parks and Rec, just some of my and The Good Place, like just some of my favorites.
Parks and Rec.
It's like one of the best TV shows ever made. The Good Place.
I'm sorry, I actually meant Good Place. The Good Place. On top of it, like it's just the way that it introduces philosophy
so good.
In such simple ways.
One of my favorite things about Mike Schur, and the reason that he's particularly someone that I think about a lot when I think about the type of career that I build and the type of person that I want to be, I think he's like me in that he's one of these slow and steady, consistent, reliable types. And when he was working at Saturday Night Live, in the first couple of months that he was there, he had this realization that he was in almost every room the least funny person in the room. He was like the people that are there are just like the cream of the crop, most hilarious, talented comedians, right? And comedy writers. So he was like, so what I am going to do is I'm going to be the most consistent and the most reliable. And because writers have, this terrible reputation for being always late, not caring about deadlines. And he was like, I am going to be the exception. I am always going to I'm going to be professional. I am going to always do exactly what I am required to do. And I'm the least funny person here, but I will be the reliable one. And he has built a incredible, consistent career. He has built rooms with lots of very funny people with him. And he is a very funny person himself. But I kind of love, like, he's my little, like, I'm just going to be the hardworking worker bee. I aspire.
Yeah. I was listening to Bill Burr, the comedian, talk about the best advice he's ever gotten. And I think he said, Dave Chappelle said to him, I don't know exactly what you're doing, but just do more of it. And similar kind of thinking, like Mike Schur, don't know what you got, but just be the most consistent dude. And then it'll come right. Like it's that prolific thing too. Be consistently prolific, pitch up, do the work, and it'll come right.
It's also, it's the old thing, right? Of like, you can either be the cheapest, the best, or on time. And, I think I've heard this advice in writing. Sorry. You can either be very nice and very reliable, or you can be very talented and very nice, or you can be very reliable and very talented. You have to be like two of those things. It's fine if you're not the third. You probably are not all three.
Yeah, you can't be all three.
I've never felt like I'm a particularly talented writer. I just am really good at putting my butt in a chair and doing a lot of it.
So having met some of your heroes, would any of them say that they are the most talented writer they know? Probably not, right? They'd probably all go, I'm not the most talented, but I do the work. Like, I think that's quite an undercurrent of people who don't know that they're doing good work.
Yeah, sure.
They just do the work. Yeah. Okay. What do you wish someone had told you when you were starting out?
It wouldn't, like, this is a cop-out answer, but it wouldn't have mattered. No, it wouldn't have mattered because I think you're not ready to hear advice until you're ready to hear advice. And I say this as someone who gives so much advice to people. I love giving people advice, but it's often pointless. I'm aware of the fact it's not pointless.
I didn't know that about you.
I don't know. Like I've made some profoundly, hilariously ridiculous decisions in my 20s, and I am thankful for every single one of them.
Yeah, I love that, and I agree completely. I think I made a lot of ridiculously stupid decisions in my 20s that I wish I hadn't, but have defined how I am now. Okay, Sam, what I'd like from you in closing is to tell everybody where they can find you, where they can follow you, where they can buy
that's
from
very
you.
Kind.
Anything else you'd like
the
to tell
best
them?
way to keep in touch is my website, blog, newsletter, likeafuckinggrownup.com. I also have a personal site, sambeckbessinger.com, which is just whatever I'm working on at the moment, which is an eclectic variety of things because I follow my curiosity. But yeah, I think the newsletter is probably the place that I put most of my life and my energy. Social media is for chumps. Come hang out with me on my newsletter.
Love it. I love the focus. Sam, it is always riveting and energizing
Love you,
to
Doc.
speak with you. Thank you for giving me so much of your time.